Hey, everybody. Welcome to part two of our conversation with Saluki Hall of Famer and former quarterback Joel Sambursky. I can promise you from Joel's perspective that he is as transparent as he was in part one when he was talking about some of the glory days being the Saluki quarterback. But part two, we'll have a little bit different mood and a different tone as we transition into talking about his son Teddy and his family and some of the health struggles that they've dealt with collectively surrounding Teddy's birth in 2017. And one of the parallel storylines going on in Joel's life at that point was he was serving on the SIU Board of Trustees, and he was tested in his morals. And we'll talk about how he had to stay strong in some of those morals, even though there were some forces maybe pulling him away from some of those things he believed in. Can't wait for you to hear it. This is part two with Joel Sambursky here on the Saluki Standards Podcast. Let's talk about your family. First, how Southern led you to your wife, Samantha. How did you guys meet? What was your first interaction?
Well, I saw her in the weight room, and I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I know that I'm not very impressive in a weight room, so that's not normally the place to try to make a move. But she was a collegiate golfer. She was recruited by Diane Doherty to golf at Southern. And so she was in the weight room one day. She probably had, she was just in there because she was told to. I don't know. Maybe the women's golf program today has a more regimented workout schedule. But at the time, you got about 80 guys in this weight room, and Samantha has to walk in there because she's probably got this workout that she's supposed to do. And so I remember her looking a little bit like, how fast can I get out of here? And that's when I saw her, and I, obviously thought she was cute, and just by chance, I bumped into her not long after at a bar. Okay. And I had a couple beers in me, and her and I just talked, and we talked all night. And here we are now, 12 years of marriage and 4 kids, and both made Southern Illinois our home.
I'm guessing maybe the most memorable day, or maybe the most challenging day, would be April 13th, 2017, when your son Teddy is born. What were the emotions on that day for the two of you?
Yeah, I mean, just super scared, excited, nervous, not really knowing what to expect. I feel like, Connor, though, I have to tell a little bit more about Sam before I get into this.
Sure.
Because it's a really neat story. So we all know and remember and love Coach Callahan. And so his dad was a member of the Board of Trustees at Southern. And his dad was known for basically taking newspaper clippings of local, newspaper stories of athletes and sending them to Saluki coaches. So Sam was not even on Diane Doherty's radar until one day she got a newspaper clipping from Dan Callahan's father saying, "You should really recruit this gal. She's a good player." And my wife grew up in Springfield. And Diane, to this day, swears that Samantha would not have been a Saluki had she not received that clipping from Dan Callahan's father. And I was able to share that with Coach Cal. I mean, Coach Cal and his dad has as much to do with, me getting married to Samantha as anybody probably. And so it's a pretty kind of neat story. But yeah, April 13th. So we have, 4 kids. We were married in 2008, and we have 4 kids now. And our youngest one, Theodore, was, my wife was just in the just doing a routine sort of after we found out she was pregnant, just routine checkup, and they went in to kind of listen to the heart, and the nurse just said, you know what, I just think something's a little off, which is not necessarily what you want to hear, but when they're developing at that early of an age, sometimes it just takes a while for the heart to kind of work itself out, right? So she went and got the doctor, and the doctor decided that just to be extra cautious, that they should send Samantha to St. Louis for kind of some additional monitoring, and so they sent her to St. Louis. She's in there. They're listening to the heart, and I'm up there with Sam as well. And they're like, hey, you know what? We just feel like we need to take just extra precaution. Let her stay overnight. And since we had 3 other kids, they ended up sending me home because obviously we got somebody who needs to take care of those kids. So I get to Carbondale and I pull into my driveway and I get the call, and it's Sam, and it's like, hey, you need to start working your way up here. The heart seems to be beating at a much more rapid heart rate. Which when they discovered the arrhythmia, the thing that they said initially was, hey, this is common, but we just want to make sure it doesn't become a rapid heart rate, because that means something's not working out well for the child. So I jump in my car, drive back to St. Louis, and when I show up at the hospital, and they basically tell Sam that we got to go in and take the baby now. So I'm driving as absolutely fast as I can to get there. It's like a scene out of a movie. I'm running up to the front desk, trying to figure out where I'm going. There's somebody that's annoyed that I'm asking questions. They don't realize that I'm not like a panicky, like I'm actually, my wife's literally having a baby, and get me to where I'm going. And I show up and I got to put all down on the gown and all the precautionary, stuff that you got to wear. And I see, like, as soon as I'm putting that stuff on, I'm right outside of, cause they had to do a C-section. I'm right outside of the operating room, and I see 3 or 4 doctors coming out smiling. Everything's fine. I'm starting to put on like all the stuff. And then I hear, get him back in here, get him back in here. And I just saw this look of just fear on these doctors' face. And I didn't really understand what was going on, of course. And so by the time that I make it in there, the baby's already born. And so, like I said, they had to go in and get him really fast. And they were actually having to hit him with those pads. And so it was just obviously shocking, jarring. That whole situation was crazy. He's born, and he was born at 4.5 pounds. He was 2 months premature. But after that, really that initial scare, he was doing much better. They put him on some medicine to kind of try to correct the heart, and everything was working out fine. He ended up staying a month in the St. Louis Children's Hospital. And this is a really long story, Connor. Are you okay?
I mean, it's fascinating though. It's
just there's just so much. There's no way to like I'm believe it or not, I'm actually giving you the Cliff Notes version. So but so he spends a month in St. Louis, and they decide, and so he's dealing with the other things that premature kids are dealing with. The lungs aren't fully developed. So he has some work to do, and so, but the doctors decided that since we have 3 other kids in Carbondale, that the best thing for Theodore and for their whole family was to send him back to Carbondale in order to just allow his lungs to continue to fully develop before he ultimately comes home with us. So obviously Mom and Dad were super excited about that. We So they were able to get an ambulance to transport him to his new home, or what was going to be his new home in Carbondale. And, mom and dad are out filming the ambulance coming in. We're super excited, welcome home, Teddy, the whole deal. And he was in that like a little box, like, he's hooked up to everything. They're monitoring him really well. And they transport him into his unit. And my wife, man, like, I'm just telling you, she's just incredible. But she just felt like something was off. And now, granted, she had just spent a month in a really stressful situation, and so it would have been really easy to not kind of trust her instincts or dismiss it as, anxiety or an overprotective sort of parent. But she just kind of felt like something was not right when she saw him. And even though he's hooked up to monitors and the heart rate and everything seemed to be normal, within an hour, he was like going into almost like septic shock. And so, as you can imagine, the doctors in Carbondale were expecting, as we were, to be receiving a healthy baby that just needed a little bit more time to develop. Now they were having to run all sorts of tests. The nurse had to, like, his heart rate was dropping, his oxygen levels were dropping significantly. So they had to go in and intubate him. And they were running tests. And when they found out that his white blood cells had dropped significantly, they realized that he had an infection that there's no way for anybody to know that. And just by pure coincidence, it just so happened on the day of his transport is the day that infection started to kind of rear its ugly head. And so the doctor made a great decision to life flight him back to St. Louis. And so we went from celebrating the arrival to what we thought was his new home to getting back to St. Louis, and just a really, really scary situation. And so we get back to St. Louis, and, I don't think I realized, I think Sam understood, but I think I wouldn't allow myself to understand how sick he was. But I would find out later that the doctors did not expect him to make it through that night. And, but obviously the good news is he did, and but he started to have seizures. And what happened was that infection got into his spinal fluid and ended up making its way to his brain. And so he started having seizures, and was really, really sick for 10 days or so. So it was a really hard period in our life, for sure. Once they were able to, basically get him to the point where he was stable, then they had to really deal with what was going on electronically with his brain. He started having swelling in the brain as a result of that infection. And so they ended up having to do surgeries to put a shunt in, and then had to deal with the epilepsy that had developed. And so he spent another 3 months in the St. Louis Children's Hospital, and is absolutely miraculously has recuperated, is doing really, really well. And so after a pretty jarring 3 months, really a jarring 1 month, and then him getting to be stable, but then they just wanted to keep him a little bit longer. They sent him home with us. It was on a Thursday, and it was the hardest weekend. I mean, we've had newborn kids before. We've had crying. We've had kids. We've done the whole no sleep thing. But by the time he got out of the St. Louis Children's Hospital into our house that weekend, I mean, we didn't sleep. He was just constantly. I mean, it was tough. Monday, we happened to have a follow-up, and and back in St. Louis. And then that's when we discovered that the infection actually robbed him of his hearing and took away his hearing, and he had profound hearing loss, which really in every way came to a shock to us. We knew that the infection had, we just remember the doctor talking about devastating consequences. And, I know that, I'll never forget that word, but it's devastating. So we knew that there were going to be, if we could survive that infection, we knew that there were going to be challenges that he would face, but we were 1,000% convinced that he could hear. We knew that blindness was a possibility, and we knew that epilepsy was a possibility based on the infection that he had, but we really felt like he could hear. And so that on that Monday, getting that news was just a total shock to us. I mean, quite candidly. And it was really, really, really hard.
How did you grieve during that time when all this is going on?
Man, I tell you, just through friends and faith. I mean, we just have really solid family and friends that loved us in the midst of it, were there for us. And then just hoping and praying that all of this was part of God's plan. And that in some way, in a big way, I think that the good Lord's going to have, that Teddy's going to have an impact on people's lives. And I think that's already happened. So I think that's kind of it. I just remember like reading a book or listening to a podcast or something about, I think it was a marathoner, talking about how they train for marathons. And when they get to the end, they really are just trying to they bring it down to, I just need to it starts out like, all right, I need to get through that mile. And then it gets really hard. And it's like, I got to get through that, half mile. And it gets to the point where you're just trying to make it 10 yards at a time. And that's how we were in the hospital. We went from never thinking, we thought that the hardest part was behind us after that very first month. And we realized that really the race had not even begun. And so we were just trying to we were breaking it down to, we just got to get through the next hour. We got to get through that next doctor's appointment. And just one step at a time. And then just relying on people. We had a whole host of family and friends that there would be, I don't want to over exaggerate, but there'd be like days at a time where we just knew our other kids were taken care of. We didn't know how necessarily, because we were so in on it with Teddy and trying to, when it was really, really, really hard, but we just knew that people were taking care of them. And I think that's a reflection of just the good natured people that we happen to find ourselves in relationship with.
It's hard enough as parents, being the adults with a lot of life experience behind you, to deal with something like that. But what about the kids? I mean, how did Teddy's siblings at a very young age handle and process what was going on with their brother?
So I think that for our oldest, I think that's going to be an experience that she'll never forget. I think our 2.5-year-old, she's not going to have a recollection of that. I wonder about it with Jace, my oldest boy, but they were as tough as Teddy was. And, they were scared. This was all new to them as it was for us. We didn't have all the answers. We all like to have answers. Okay, this is bad. Tell me how bad is it? And the thing is, with the brain, it's such a complicated thing that even the smartest folks in the world, they can't tell you what this means for him developmentally, what it means for potential challenges he may face. And so as we were navigating through that with our kids, they're just rock solid and they're great kids. And they're super tough. And, they're learning sign language. They're learning, I think the biggest thing that I'm so proud with my other kids is just the empathy that they have towards other people. And I don't care if my kid, my son ever throws a game-winning touchdown against the top-ranked team, but he has empathy for others because he has that for Teddy. So differences in people, disabilities, they're attuned to that, and I'm proud of that, and I love that about them, and I see the impact that our youngest is already having in their lives. They're learning sign language, and they love to talk to their friends about Theodore and his situation, and so that's what I'm really proud of my kids, and so if I may, Connor, I'll just kind of continue the story, because believe it or not, it's not even over yet. Sorry about that.
Please do. I'm all ears.
So we find out about that, and that was that was super challenging with him losing his hearing, and then 3 months later, Theodore started to have seizures. Now, as a result of the seizures he had initially when the infection came in, he was still on seizure medicine. And it wasn't like the seizures that are maybe more profound in folks that have epilepsy. Like, I know Coach Kill, when he would have seizures on the sideline, it would be, really obviously very noticeable. But like with Theodore, it was not as noticeable. It was just kind of like small little movements or a fluttering of the eyes or something like that, that we, without an experience or knowing this, we didn't really know what that meant. We didn't even know his seizures, to be honest with you. So what we were told with our neurology team, with Teddy's neurology team, was to go ahead and record them and then to send that to them, and then they would be able to view that. And so we were doing that. And the big thing is they just didn't want it to ever go over 5 minutes. So we would record them, we would send it out to them, and they would just keep increasing the seizure medicine that he was on. And then he'd have another one a couple of days later, and then they'd increase it again. And then they got to the point where there was no more room to move on the seizure meds. And my wife just so fortunate. She just said, Joel, something's not right. This isn't right. And she just put Teddy in the car and drove him to the emergency room and in St. Louis. And as she was kind of describing what was going on with Theodore, she overheard one of the ER docs. So this wasn't even his team. This was like on a Saturday night, or, some like 10 o'clock at night, by the time that she finally got in there. And that's when we first heard about infantile spasms. And we had no idea about it. We didn't know about it. But that's when they were able to do a range of tests on him. And the thing about infantile spasms is it's easy to diagnose, I guess. There's an electronic pattern, if you will, of brain waves that is pretty noticeable, but they're really, really, really bad on the brain. And no seizure is healthy. There are no good seizures out there. They are all really, really bad. There are certain types of seizures that it's my understanding that people can have and continue to function to some level of normalcy. And then there are seizures like that infantile spasms have, where they're absolutely debilitating to the brain. And so, as you can imagine, given everything that we'd already been through at that point, when we learned about infantile spasms, I mean, it was just a crushing kind of blow. And so the doctor was just like, we have to, at all costs, we have to get these things to stop. And which led us to basically 2 or 3 different options that we could choose from. And man, talk about trying to make a call on this. I mean, every one of the range of options had pretty significant side effects. So And infantile spasms is rare enough. There's not a lot of studies that suggest which one's the best approach, and the doctor kind of put it in our hands to make a call. But one form of treatment greatly suppressed his immune system and would actually have to be administered in the hospital. Another one, he would become at a high risk of blindness. In another one, it would potentially reduce his immune system, and he would have other consequences as well. And they all had about a 30 or 40% success rate. They did do some studies out in England that suggested if you combine a couple of the different treatment options, it'd be about a 43% success rate. And we were just fully committed to try to do everything that we could to get these things to stop. And so we decided to combine the treatment. And one of the aspects of that was this highly regulated medicine that they only had, I think, a couple different pharmacies in the country or something that held on to that, if I remember that correct. So they were having to work through the paperwork to get that before we could actually administer that. But they started him on the other form of treatment. Again, we were going to combine the two, and within a day of them starting that other treatment, all the seizures just stopped, which just blew everybody's mind. Which was great for many reasons, because that debilitation of the brain was able to stop. And then we also didn't have to administer that other medicine, which had these potential devastating consequences with it. And I can tell you to this day, man, I know this is a lot to take in. It's a lot, but he still hasn't had any seizures to this day. And his neurology team is in every way kind of just blown away by this, just everything that he's endured to this point. And now we've got a awesome 3.5-year-old little boy that's running around. He's got a cochlear implant in one side and a hearing aid in the other, and he's got a shunt that's been surgically implanted in his brain, and he is one of the kids, and he's doing great.
If any, what are some of the long-term challenges that he could face now that he's gotten through some of these early life difficulties?
Well, I mean, so kids developmentally, you never know, right? So
right.
How much he's able to soak in and communicate and do all of that. Physically, he looks like he's progressing very, very well. I think verbally, everybody's pretty amazed at how well he's doing from that standpoint. But he has 90% hearing loss in both of his ears, and he needs a hearing aid, and he needs cochlear implants to help him hear. And so what challenges that's going to provide to him, I tell you what, with everything that kid has fought through, I think he's going to be able to handle it really well. And we're just kind of blown away at his progress at this point. And so I think for us, we're just trying to figure out what's the best way to get him the education that he needs, the communication that he needs, and also the love and support, and make sure that he understands that, yeah, he's going to be a little different. Yeah, he's going to be communicating a little bit different, but that he has a community that he fits into. And so we've learned a lot about, as much as we can, I think, about the resources that he has available. And he's just a miracle child. He really is.
Before we move on, I just want to say thank you for your courage in that journey, and also sharing that story with us. I mean, that's not easy stuff to talk about. So I really appreciate you sharing that with me and with our listeners too.
Well, thanks, man. You're welcome. I tell you what, though, we have a happy ending to the story, and there's a lot of kids in that children's hospital, a lot of parents that don't have that, and we just feel, and we recognize that, and the people that work in those hospitals, they really do just incredible work, and they saved our child's life, and we just really hope and pray that Teddy's going to be able to be an inspiration to a lot of kids in his life, a lot of people in his life.
I mean this sincerely. I feel like if we were in like an auditorium full of people that you telling that story would get and deserves like a standing ovation. It's really, really neat that you guys came out on the other side of it and have a story to tell, and you can help people now.
If we feel that way, we really do, and believe it or not, that really was the Cliff Notes version. So it's kind of a lot to say, and it's a lot to digest. And I hope the listeners understand why I went through that. And so thank you.
Yeah. Well, we can get a beer after COVID, and I'd love to hear the full version.
Well, it may need to be 2 beers then. So
cool with me. Cool with me. The other impact you've had on the community is your time on the board, serving on the Southern Illinois University Board of Trustees. First of all, when you began that part of your life, why did you want to serve and give back to your alma mater?
Well, it's just a great opportunity to make an impact. And, so everything I just described was going on while I was serving on the Board of Trustees. So as you can imagine, it was just a lot to juggle. But when you're asked to serve on the board of an institution that you absolutely adore, you love, you see the value that institution has, and in your life, I'm a first generation college grad. My wife's a first generation college grad. We've seen what education, how it's transformed our family, how it's transformed other families. We see the impact that Southern Illinois University has in the region. And it's the nurse that found that heart arrhythmia was an SIU, I think Edwardsville. It was an SIU Edwardsville nursing program graduate. The heart doctor that treated Teddy was an SIU Carbondale School of Medicine graduate. I mean, these are people that are truly making an impact on people's lives. And so for me to step in and to serve on a board to help steer that institution, it's just a huge honor. It was an incredible amount of work, but it was all work that's worthy to be done.
A lot of people have similar stories to you. They want to give back to something they're passionate about or they've been a part of. And, I think it goes for any sort of political type position. And then some people find there can be frustrations and you can't get done what you want to get done. But on your time on the board, what's something or multiple things that you feel like you've accomplished that did change your alma mater?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I think that I'm really proud that that we were able to hold down tuition costs and fees the way that we did for the 5 years that I served on the board. We had the slowest growth of tuition and fees that we've had in a long time. I think that's important. There's to get the SIU School of Nursing, the SIU Carbondale School of Nursing program, pushed really hard on that and was able to get that done. I mean, the reality is that Carbondale has faced challenges that are very unique that other institutions are not facing. One of the things about COVID right now is that for the most part, every higher education university is having to figure this thing out. Well, there were challenges that we faced on that board that were pretty unique to either SIU, the system, or schools in the state of Illinois. As an example, we went 18 months without a budget. We didn't have a budget. I mean, I own a business. Like, and I do financial planning. So like budgeting is a pretty important concept. And so how do you make decisions when you don't know how much money is going to be coming in and coming out? And then how do you recruit in students when every day they're reading a newspaper or they're hearing about university school, Illinois schools shutting down as a result of not having a budget? So it was an incredibly difficult environment to find myself on the board. Secondly, we had 2 tragedies that happened in leadership. First, we lost completely unexpectedly our chancellor. We lost two chancellors, and Paul Sarvela passed away very unexpectedly early on in my tenure on the board. We went through a national search, and then when Teddy was in the hospital and all that stuff was going on, the other thing that I was doing is I was running back to Carbondale when I felt like he was in a stable position, and I would do with the board. I would do interviews with chancellor candidates, and we were able to find someone that I view as a great chancellor candidate, and it's Carlo Montemagno, who really, I think, helped re-envision how we were doing things as a university. And then within, I think it was maybe a year or not long after, he passed away very unexpectedly. And so, those were some really hard things to deal with. And then as we operate as a system, you have the challenges that systems face when you have SIU Carbondale and then SIU Edwardsville, and you have sort of that dynamic. And so it was a tumultuous time. It was challenging, but the work was all worth it, because I think it's a position that you can have an impact on. Your vote does matter. Now you're one of 7 votes, but at the end of the day, it's one of 7. It does matter. And again, the work that you do is important to a lot of people.
I know legally you might not be able to disclose some of the things from, the Carbondale Edwardsville situation. But, maybe everybody listening doesn't have a full understanding of everything that went on with the reallocation of funds and Randy Dunn and trying to move money. If you would just give people an idea of kind of that whole situation and your involvement in what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's on top of 2 chancellors passing away, not having a budget. On top of that, we had a situation that was going on in the president's office that really is just unprecedented. I mean, it's just unprecedented. And I'm gonna a lot of the details that people want to find, I'm sure that they can Google. And I think the point is that as a member of the board, I had a fiduciary responsibility to do what's right for the system. And that system is not just Carbondale. Look, I played at Carbondale. I have 2 degrees from Carbondale. My home is in Carbondale. I get it. Like, people are going to look at me who don't like me as a board member and think that I just care about Carbondale. In the same way that maybe people down here may look at someone who lives in Edwardsville that's on the board, that's making a vote, that thinks that they don't care about Carbondale. And that's just always going to exist. And I tried my hardest to make sure that at the end of the day, people can think what they want, but how did you vote? And 98% of the time, things that were important to people in Edwardsville, to that campus, I supported. But there was an attempt to do the largest budgetary shift with by the president's office, with no research, behind sort of the backs of people, not following any sort of process that would have had a devastating impact to not just the Carbondale campus, but to the system as a whole. And I didn't like how that transpired, of course. There were other members on the board that came to a shock as well. Just in March, before our meeting, we had all discussed publicly a willingness to evaluate how the university system distributes funds. And we really had a good faith effort to take up the work of doing that evaluation. And then I think 11 or 12 days later, there was an agenda item in our April board meeting that did the opposite of that just shifted funds and was opposite of what we all just discussed. And so that was a subject that was very passionate to a lot of people in Edwardsville. They felt like they were not getting enough funds. And then there are people in Carbondale that felt like, well, if the system's unfair, let's evaluate it and see where that unfairness lies. And my feeling is like, let's be data-driven leaders that evaluates this and makes good, sound decisions, not based on where they live or where they got their degree, but based on actual data, actual facts. And so that was kind of the beginning of a tough situation that I had and other members of the board had with the president. And then we essentially found a lot of information that there were other things going on at that time that were even bigger than a reallocation of funds. And so members of the board really had to make a decision on and I was one of them, is do we want to allow that sort of activity to take place, or do we want to stand strong and say that no, that can't happen. If we're going to be fiduciaries of the system, that sort of stuff cannot happen. And so, listen, it would have been very easy for me to have just stepped away and say, look, my kid's in the hospital. I've got a lot of other things that I'm dealing with that are very important, obviously, to me, and just step away. And I wanted to be very candid with you. I wanted to step away. It was taking everything. I'd already written a resignation letter. It was taking everything for me to stay on that board. But when I found and kind of, just discovered everything that was going on, I just felt like it would have been completely wrong for me to step away at that time. And so I decided to stand up and expose it and fight it. And I knew that was going to not make a lot of people happy. And that's okay. At the end of the day, Coach Kill had 3 rules in college. It's be on time, go to class, and do the right thing. And I'm not always on time. I did go to class. But doing the right thing is big, especially when you are entrusted with something as important as making decisions for the SIU system. And so in that 5 years, we had a lot going on. I don't have any regrets except a couple, but I won't go into those specifically. But I am proud of how I left the university, knowing that I didn't make necessarily the easy decisions. I did what I felt like was right, even though it took a personal toll on me, and I'm proud of that.
I mean, when you would go out to, say, the grocery store or show up at a game, how often would people want to talk about this stuff? And did it ever get tense when you were around in the community?
Yeah, I mean, there was a moment in when we were having a meeting in Edwardsville where, I mean, I would get booed, which I've been booed before, so that's fine. But these are
Edwardsville people would boo you.
Yeah, like or they would say things, or they would say things publicly that were just question my motives, as if I just cared about Carbondale. And unfortunately, that's kind of that's politics. And I'm okay. I haven't lost an ounce of sleep thinking about that. Did I enjoy it? No. And yeah, it was, Carbondale, SIU here in Carbondale is really important to the region. And so it was a hot topic on a lot of people's minds. I did the best that I could to not, go into things with people at the grocery store. I didn't feel like that was appropriate. And my general sense is that people appreciated, me standing up and trying to expose the truth and fight for the right thing for the system. But then again, not a lot of people who disagree with you are going to come tell you that at the grocery store. So, and that's okay. I mean, it's the cost of being on the board. You're going to make some people proud, and you're going to make others really upset. And that's the hard part of serving in that role. And man, I'm a people pleaser. I love when people are happy of the work that I do, but I also know that that's just an impossible accomplishment, I think, if you're going to serve in that role, and that's okay.
Are you happier now that you're done with that phase of your life?
You know what? It really was such an honor, and I hope I'm not coming across like a complainer. We had, in the 5 years that I served, we just had some of the hardest things to ever deal with, and I am proud to have been on that board and to have a front row seat and to help make some decisions in the midst of pretty chaotic times. I am happy to be at home. I'm happy that the amount of emails that I get has declined by about 50%. I've got kids. I've got 4 kids under the age of 10. I'm excited to be able to spend time with them, and it was a really big sacrifice. But at the same time, I am super thankful and appreciative of the opportunity to serve the way that I did, and it's a great honor. It's a great honor, and I really hope nobody asks me to do it again for some time. Because it's an honor that it's hard to say no to for all the reasons that I've stated. But right now, I've got other priorities that need my attention.
But maybe later.
Well, that's not. My point is when people ask you to serve in that sort of a role, it's hard to say no because you can have such an impact on an institution you love.
Right.
And I'm just really hoping nobody asks me until my kids are grown. So
yeah, no, I was being somewhat facetious.
Okay.
You'd want to serve again, but man, I tell you what. First of all, congratulations, because I think you just became our first 2-parter on this podcast. So that means you have tremendous depth. So,
oh, dude, that's good. I love it. Thanks, man.
Yeah. But no, truly, on multiple fronts, on what we covered in this conversation, I think no matter what part of the conversation you listen to, people will be able to listen and take something and apply it to their own life. So, really great stuff. I'm glad you shared with us.
Man, I'm happy to be on the podcast and wish you continued success.